Hello and welcome back to Underlab. Time to talk about Chara, or Chara. Which one do you prefer? I'm more of a Chara person myself, so if you're not a fan of that, just pretend I'm saying Chara every time I mention Chara. Alright, now that's out of the way, onto the actual topic of the video. In the last theory I made, I discussed what potentially happened to Chara's soul. What I didn't consider is whether Frisk has some sort of connection to Chara, and upon consideration I think it's quite likely they do. In this video, I'd like to look at the similarities and links between the two characters and speculate about the possibility that Frisk has more to do with Chara than we first thought. I'll admit that this is nothing more than an idea that depends on how we interpret the game. Still, I think it's pretty interesting to talk about, and it does perhaps shed some insight on Chara's personality, which for the most part is a complete mystery. Alright, let's get right in there and take a look. Firstly, I may as well talk a little about what exactly reincarnation is. It's a spiritual belief found in both philosophy and religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism that states when you die, you'll be reborn in a new body. Typically the idea is that the better a person you're in life, the more likely it is that you'll be reborn in heaven. However, if you're evil, you'll be reborn as something lesser than human, or perhaps even sent to hell. The concept seemingly has very little to do with Undertale, but when we consider how intensely focused the game is upon themes of morality, it starts to manifest as something a little more relevant. On the point of being reincarnated into an animal, what about the determined bird? Perhaps they were a human reborn as an animal, considering how determined they are compared to most monsters. Just a thought. Anyhow, back on topic. Chara and Frisk are two conspicuously similar characters who seem to have had somewhat parallel lives. This makes them seem almost like the same person, despite the clear distinction. Okay, so let's look at the facts. There's the blatant, superficial ones. Both of them are wearing stripy shirts, which we know in the world of Undertale apparently indicates that you're a kid. They both have shaggy hair, and they both have singular, unchanging expressions. None of this means much, though it's just the beginning of a list of minor coincidences that could be argued to add up to something much more. Let's talk about something a little more interesting. Is it possible that Chara and Frisk both had very similar lives? It's hard to say, as I believe the backstories of the two are left mostly up to our interpretation. However, the same themes crop up in relation to both characters. All we know about Chara is that they apparently hated humanity, which explains why they ran away to somewhere as desolate as Mount Ebott. Many players agree that Chara was considering suicide, or at least expected the worst. After all, Mount Ebott is infamous due to the fact that the travellers who visit never come back. You may be wondering what that has to do with Frisk. Well, the truth is, we don't know Frisk's backstory. I believe it's left entirely up to the player to decide. However, that may not be the case. When talking to Asriel at the end of the game, he seems to subtly implicate that suicide may have been the reason Frisk decided to climb Mount Ebott. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Why else would Frisk go to such a terrible place? Clearly most humans stay far away from Mount Ebott for a good reason. Now, there could be other explanations, as I've already been over in my theory video titled The Real Reason Why Frisk Fell Underground. Still, the contemplation of suicide seems to be a very likely answer, as why else would Asriel specifically mention it, when paired in conjunction with Chara being a misanthrope who was likely also considering suicide? It appears Toby is trying to draw some serious patterns between both characters. Whatever the case, a similar fate befell both Frisk and Chara. Depending on our choices throughout the game, we'll end up being adopted by monster kind, with Toriel as our surrogate mother. Chara ended up in exactly the same situation, except back then Asriel was alive and Asgore and Toriel were still together. So it seems that Chara and Frisk have had strangely similar experiences. Fortunately, Frisk doesn't die of poisoned buttercups, unlike Chara. What exactly does this indicate about them both then? Is this the idea of fate that Asriel mentioned? It seems almost as if it were destiny that Frisk picks up where Chara left off. After all, both Asriel and Chara wanted to escape the underground and free everyone below. Frisk just so happens to be the very human who achieves this on the true pacifist path. As I mentioned in my previous video about the core's greatest secret, Chara's coffin appears in Asgore's basement alongside the coffins of the 6 humans. While their soul and body is nowhere to be found, the soul depicted on the front of Chara's coffin is clearly red. This indicates that even though we seemingly never see it in-game, Chara's soul was likely red, just like Frisk's. Red appears to mean determination, so once again it seems like a pretty big coincidence that the two humans both represent the same trait. Now, none of this necessarily means that Frisk is Chara reincarnated. They've just led lives that seem like reflections of one another. However, couldn't Frisk be Chara's opportunity to right their wrongs? Considering how little we're told about Frisk, if Frisk really was Chara reincarnated, then doesn't it make sense that they'd want to complete the objective that they had in their previous life? It's often claimed that when someone is reincarnated, they remember some of their former lives' memories, though not all. Perhaps these all seem like loose connections that hint at nothing more than similar characteristics. However, there is a neat bow that seems to wrap up this theory. Deep within the game's files, the soul you control when dodging attacks is called Our Heart. Now, what exactly could that mean? That Frisk and Chara are one and the same? It seems whether Frisk is Chara reincarnated or not, there's definitely some deeper link between the two that isn't necessarily explained during the game. I mean, let's just think about why exactly Toby would choose to name it Our Heart rather than just Heart, or even Frisk's Heart. Calling it Our Heart seems to imply that Frisk and Chara share the same soul, and as I mentioned earlier, we know both of their souls are red. Could Frisk's soul simply be Chara's soul in a new body then? We can surmise that Chara was likely very determined. Perhaps whatever remained of Chara sought out Frisk because they wanted the child to succeed. Does this explain why Chara appears at the end of the genocide run as well then? If Frisk doesn't carry out their purpose of freeing the underground, then there's really no reason for them to exist if this theory is correct. Therefore Chara comes back as something wicked because Frisk failed to amass good karma. Remember that karma is a thing in Undertale too, as we find out when fighting Sans. We could interpret the ending of the genocide run as practically being sent to hell, which as I explained is a belief of reincarnation as well, as this may happen if you're an evil person in life. If we think about it, resetting is kind of like Frisk being reincarnated, if not Chara, just with the addition of being sent back into the past. We have the opportunity to do things differently, and to be a good or a bad person. After completing the genocide run, however, it seems that fate has decided your past redemption, and you're prevented from ever obtaining a truly happy ending. Once again, the concepts of karma and reincarnation all fit quite snugly into explaining why this happens. So, to summarise this theory, it seems fairly possible that Frisk and Chara are somehow intrinsically the same. Whether reincarnation or not, there's no denying that there's some sort of spiritual bond between both characters. Chara is an ambiguous character who we know held a lot of hate for humanity, but we really don't know much else about them. I think it's very likely that they genuinely cared for Asriel, however, and whether because they were reincarnated or because fate dictated it, it seems that Frisk took Chara's place to fulfill the plan that was sadly cut short by Asriel's death. Morality and karma are very common themes found in Undertale, and there's no doubt in my mind that Toby was trying to convey some sort of message about being a good person. Not only that, however, but I think that Undertale also promotes that a bad person can redeem themselves, as we see with Asgore and Asriel. Perhaps Frisk was unconsciously influenced by Chara to head to Mount Ebott and to help shatter the barrier once and for all. Or maybe Frisk and Chara are simply dumb kids who think jumping down giant holes is cool. It's hard to know for sure. It's worth noting that we also named Chara at the beginning of the game, and not Frisk. Once again, this is just more evidence of how Chara is present throughout the entire game, despite only physically appearing on the genocide run. There's many other possibilities that could explain everything, however, as Undertale is a game full of things left up to the player's interpretation. What do you think? Is Frisk Chara reincarnated? Or are they just connected somehow? Or do you just think I'm noticing patterns in everything and that they're actually two completely separate entities? Let me know in the comments. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the video. Try not to be reincarnated as a slug, and I'll see you next time.